Welcome, everybody, to a bonus episode of the HTMA View. Have you been loving season 1? We are having so much fun, not only talking all about HTMA, mineral balancing, how it's affected our lives personally, but also having some amazing guests like Kaely McDevitt. So Kaely and her husband, Kevin, purchased Trace Elements International from Dr. Watts, and she's here today to talk all about HTMA testing and sharing some of the insights that you all are just wanting to dive into and learn more about. Kaely, tell us why you're here and all about your HTMA journey.
Sure. Yeah. So my background is as a dietitian, and I ended up finding my way into the women's health space out of personal necessity on my own healing journey about 12 years ago or so, and have stayed in the women's health space since. And I run a virtual private practice with a small team. We work with women all over the US, and we've used functional lab testing really since the start. And I just have forever nerded out over that, being able to see behind the curtain of what's going on with our clients and being able to really personalize our interventions. And over the years, what was perplexing to me is that some people would get better quickly and others wouldn't, or some would get better and stay better and others wouldn't. And it wasn't until we started dabbling in the HTMA realm that we found answers for those types of questions and why certain people had the resilience that it took to move effectively through a protocol. So needless to say, HTMA became actually the only test we automatically did for every single client because it just became so essential. My team and I all had our own personal experiences with HTMAs radicalizing our own health. And I'm sure you guys all feel this way too, as practitioners that tend to be type A and more stressed, like such a big tool. And so it became an essential tool, had to use it. I moved into teaching other practitioners how to use tests like HTMA in their practice for a long time. It was fall of 2023. We live in Texas, and we were like, hey, I'd love to tour Trace Elements. We live relatively close by. We've never seen it. I'm genuinely curious what's next for this company because we knew the previous owners were retirement age. And so we came and toured it, had some conversations, and then really organically over about 13 months went through the process of acquiring the lab from them. It's been a really cool experience. And the driving factor behind all of it was to protect and preserve what we love about Trace Elements and help modernize and expand its reach.
Love it. That is amazing. Well, and I know we've got some great questions we get so many questions mentoring other practitioners who are learning HTMA. It's like, what lab do you use? Why do you use them? Because there are some major differences. And that's what we really want to dive into today so that people understand that there are platinum standards. And that's one of the reasons why all of us here today use Trace Elements lab testing. Right. So, Amber, I think you're going to start this one off. So how about you dive in and ask a very common question that we get all the time about hair prep?
Yes, I think this is so important. So we would love to clear up how it truly matters to have proper prep of the hair. So personally, I usually recommend washing the hair and using a distilled rinse or shower filter if that's not possible, using a shampoo that's free from zinc and selenium so there's no contaminations. And then I usually will have people air dry their hair for 2 to 4 hours. But I think, we all have seen those tests where we thought there was some water contamination. So we just wanted to hear what your input was on that.
Yeah, really good question. And I do think this is something that could use a lot more clarity in the space because this is how we ensure we get really reliable results back and we don't have to redo things for clients potentially. So the bare minimum that we need to accomplish here is that hair has not been recently dyed or chemically treated. So our rule of thumb there is at least 6 to 8 weeks, ideally, that we've got some fresh growth that hasn't been chemically treated. We need to have a zinc and selenium free shampoo. So the ones to be watching out for our clients is really any of the treatment ones. So a lot of the dandruff shampoos are going to have those compounds in them. We don't want to have any other products in. So we can use conditioner in the shower, but no leave-in conditioners, gels, mousses, anything like that. And then the hair should be dry. So you hit on that too with allowing a couple hours of air drying before. And that's literally just so we don't let the water content skew the weight because this is all based on the weight of the hair. Now, beyond that, I think it makes sense to have some either shower head filtration or rinses that we do at home to minimize the impact of hard water and other water contaminants. This is not considered essential by all practitioners. And I will say, like, genuinely, you can find out, or you can see in a report if something is likely to be a hard water contamination versus a true high calcium level for them. The metabolic patterns will still hold true for them. You can genuinely see that. But personally, I would like to know, what is this calcium level really like for this person, without having to say, well, some of this is beyond what's true for your body because of the water exposure. So if somebody hasn't looked into the water hardness in their area, that's a great place to start. See if this is an issue for them. A shower head filter is a great option for both water hardness and also other contaminations that we know are in tap water, unfortunately. And then past that, we can do distilled or RO rinses for a couple of showers prior to the collection to try to minimize the buildup that would be on the scalp and hair follicle.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. Do you have a favorite shower filter or one that you recommend?
So I really like the company Hydrovive because they're customizing it for the water quality of the location. So they're going to actually change what's in the filter. And I actually don't know if that's an international company, but in the US, and we've used them for years and really like them.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. All right.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Absolutely.
Do you have a shampoo that you recommend?
I don't have one across the board. It really is so individualized for the person, right? Different types of shampoos. I'm just looking for ones that aren't going to have elements in them that are going to show up weird on the test. Personally, I can share. I really like the Viore shampoo bars. It's like a rice water based shampoo. It's clean. It's a bar. It lasts literally forever. So I've been experimenting with that one.
Nice. Oh, that's amazing. All right, Tara, I think you've got a question that you want to clear up as well.
So I can't possibly be the only one that's curious about this, but I was hoping you would walk us through the journey of the hair once it hits the lab all the way to results. Additionally, I'm curious of the type of prep. So are there chemicals involved? And if so, why? And if not, then why not? And then also, how is the hair measured? Or how are the minerals in the hair measured?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. I feel like we never get to talk about this side. This is like the super nerdy details of what goes on over here, but really happy to get into that for sure. And I think I'll start first with commentary on like the chemical washing process and why we don't do that. And then I'll walk you through the journey of your hair once you send it off in the mail. And so Trace Elements does not chemically wash samples when they come into the lab. That is not necessarily true for all lab companies that run hair tissue mineral analysis. And this is based on the fact that the studies that have looked into this have not been able to show that chemical washing only removes exogenous elements and not messing with endogenous elements. And so throughout the decades, Trace Elements has done extensive studies on both washed and unwashed hair samples to see what makes sense for us as a lab. And in one study that I think is the most interesting that they did on canines, and they chose canines because they don't have sweat glands. So they are not going to have that potential topical exposure with sweat that would skew the sodium and potassium.
I didn't even know that about canines.
So, yeah, I probably learned that from you, Lisa.
They pant. That's how they sweat. That's why dogs pant when they get hot. Yeah.
So they did this with canine hair samples because they were making sure that there was as minimum as possible, sodium, potassium topical contamination. And so they did a number of different chemical wash procedures, compared this to untreated samples. And really our results in-house agreed with these studies that there was a significant removal of the endogenous elements with different washing techniques, and some of them over 90%. So wow. A big change in that endogenous mineral content. And throughout the years as well, Trace Elements has participated in inter-laboratory comparison studies with ARL and doctors' data. And there's great agreement between the labs when the sample preparation is the same. So if it is not the same, we're going to have big differences in those results. And that is most notably impacting the sodium and potassium content when there is washing. So as a lab, we do not chemically wash samples. And I think that that's a super important decision point when you're looking at what lab to use. Any questions on the wash side before we get into what happens to hair once it gets here?
Covered it. Thank you.
And I could say here, I'm actually in the lab this week, so it was a fun time to be talking to you guys.
Oh, amazing.
But okay, so you cut the hair, you send it off into the mail, it arrives here, and then that hair is weighed, cut, and digested and prepared in test tubes. And so the digestion process is breaking this down. We're using both an acid and a heat in order to do this. It's getting this into a liquid, prepared into a test tube. And then that is moving on to the second step of this process. And so HTMA has been going on for decades. There have been a number of evolutions in the types of technology that is used. And it was in the 80s that we moved from atomic absorption to what's called inductively coupled plasma, or ICP mass spec. That's considered the gold standard, and it's what we still use today. And that really elevated this type of testing. It allowed for a lot more precise mineral and heavy metal measurements. These ICP mass spec systems can handle a high volume and handle limits of detection in the part per million and low part per billion range. So we got just like greater specificity and ability to handle volume with that change in technology. And so for anybody that cares, what actually happens in this process is we introduce a small amount of the sample as a fine mist into the ICP mass spec machine, and then it's ionized. So it is sprayed into a super hot plasma torch. So it's like an electrically charged gas. This is breaking that sample down into individual ions. And then those enter the mass spectrometer. So these ions pass through this, and this is actually separating them based on weight and charge. So we're getting that individual ion separation. And then there's a detection plate that those ions hit on the back end. And this is literally counting ions. And that number tells us how much of each element was present in that individual sample. And so then that raw data gets presented in our graphs. And in the additional commentary in Profile 2, that's based on our lab's established reference intervals and really the lifetime of work from Dr. Watts and his work with Dr. Eck that essentially created a language of what does it mean when these elements show up in the hair at these levels, and what do they mean in relationship to one another, and how can we use hair mineral content to tell us about the adrenals, the thyroid, the nervous system, our metabolism. And that's really where I think the magic happens.
Amazing.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's cool.
Tara's totally nerding out right now. She's like, my mind is blown. I just need a moment.
Can I come? Can I come see?
Absolutely.
It is amazing. I went down and toured the lab. It is an amazing facility. Yeah.
Oh, I definitely want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Field trip time.
Yes.
Right? Absolutely. Katie, I think you've got some questions.
Yeah. So I'm still thinking about that idea of the mist.
Right?
I'm like, wow. Okay. So my question is, what are some of the most common misconceptions or misunderstandings about HTMA that you've encountered, and how do you address these?
Yeah, I feel like we could have a multi-hour discussion on this, and I know the work that you guys all do is relevant to this too. So I'm going to try to keep this to a couple, and then we can have discussions on it. But I think the biggest issue that I see in my work mentoring other practitioners with HTMAs is that they are so used to treating lab work as a diagnostic tool that they look at an HTMA with that same lens, where we get a report and we're like diagnosing a high potassium or diagnosing a low sodium. And that's really not at all what HTMA is intended to do. This is a feedback tool. It's a report card. It's a snapshot of somebody's biochemistry. And I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that this isn't a test that can be read at face value. There's so much nuance here, and it requires us to slow down and understand what's really happening inside the body that would present a pattern like this in the tissues. So I think the framework that we look at this test is fundamentally misconstrued often, especially for new practitioners in this space. And I do think it's what can give HTMA a bad rep in some practitioner communities, because we're thinking of it as a tool that it really isn't. So I'd say the lens at which we view the HTMA is really important, and the way that we address this is through education. And I think all of this is going to come back to education and conversations like this. It's why I'm, endlessly grateful for you guys and the work that you do and making shows like this available. But it is conversations around what is HTMA, how valuable of a tool it is, and that it is so different from looking at other types of tests. And it can be a great adjunct to other types of tests too, but it requires a different lens. I think the second most common misunderstanding or misconception is that it's wildly inaccurate due to potential contamination. And I would say that's true for any test, right? Like there's no perfect test, especially if sample collection isn't done according to instructions. So that's not an issue that's unique to HTMA, but it is true. We should care about that sample collection. So we're going back to our initial first question and making sure that that's done correctly. But a effectively collected sample is a very reliable tool to help somebody on their health. So again, we're coming back to education, standardizing that collection instruction process a little bit more. And then, I think the last thing again is just that this is not read at face value. A true or a high measurement on an HTMA does not always indicate that somebody has too much of a particular element. There's so much more depth to that kind of conversation. So I'm sure we'll talk about kind of where we view things going with trace elements over the years and what had motivated this decision in the first place. But a lot of that is around creating better access to education and conversation in the field so that this can become a much more mainstream tool and not this kind of fringe, feels less accurate than other things type of a test.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes right into, Vanessa, your question about, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, well, something you said, Kaely, at the beginning, you talked about this kind of the modernizing of things. And so what I really wanted to ask was, after acquiring the lab from Dr. David Watts, what improvements, what changes do you envision for trace elements labs over the HTMA testing process over the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that was perfect lead into this question. It's great. So the first thing I want to be super clear about, because this is what I would be wanting to hear as a practitioner that loves this lab, is that we are not changing the process and quality standards. We're not going to all of a sudden wash samples or change anything up there. That's what we want to protect. And a big motivator for the acquisition was making sure that a big lab company didn't come in and change all of that we love that's going on over here. But essentially the way that we're viewing improvements or updates is like a multi-phase process. So the first phase, which has been underway this year because the acquisition was finalized in December and will probably run us through the end of the year, is the not sexy stuff, the stuff that nobody sees. It's investing in the infrastructure and the team. It's like super fun stuff like upgrading servers and getting everybody the computers that they need. We are combing through our supplement line and making little tweaks and updates there. We are working to expand the clean room to get a third analyzer up and running, which will be really, really important for the growth of this lab. So we're doing a lot of internal behind the scenes stuff that really won't impact you guys much yet. But the next phase is going to be working on updating the submittal form to expand the conditions and symptoms that we're tracking so that we can have some better data collection in some new places. That's something that I'm like super excited about personally. Nice. And we'll definitely be reaching out to the practitioner community to get some input on directions we'd like to go there. We want to modernize the website, the ordering process, and the whole e-commerce experience. Within that goal, we plan to have a portal so that we can, access results that way instead of the way that's being done. Just really bringing this to modern times. We want to expand that educational library for practitioners, get an actual marketing game plan going over here so we can reach new practitioners, reach new people. And then that last piece is really facilitating community and communication in the field. And I just think the more we have opportunities for education and connection, like we're just big on all ships rise together, right? Like not gatekeeping, not keeping things behind a paywall, just really advancing the field. So getting into conferences or workshops, which I think the last one that was done here was in the early 2000s. So it's just there's a lot that we can do on that education side, but those are really the big pillars of the directions that we're headed.
Amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That is. Well, and I think you've already answered my question. I feel like I need to dive down a different rabbit hole now because I mean, the validity of hair testing, we touched on that. That's a big one. I think a lot of people are still pulling up the 1985, articles and looking at JAMA from, 50 years ago and where they didn't even take the hair sample correctly. And we're still talking about this, right? There are more now. I did share it in one of the classes. There are more now that are coming out, in the late kind of teens of the 20s that are more positive, right? And I mean, I think that's one of our goals also just as a group is to say, how do we bring this to the table and make people understand the value of it and what we're seeing? Because and maybe you can comment on this. I think that a lot of times clients are actually taken back when you review their HTMA and can identify things about them that they maybe haven't even reviewed with you yet. Right?
Yeah, my goodness. I feel like HTMAs have been like the single greatest conversation starter in client relationships. And like you have to get honest with yourself and your stress when you look at an HTMA. Yeah.
What I have my preference, and I know probably everybody else does too. What do you think the most valuable ratio is on the test?
Man, I just really like all of them.
Like,
I
favorite child.
use the thyroid ratio is relevant in my practice and so helpful very often. So I work with a lot of women that are trying to conceive and struggling to. So we see a lot of subclinical hypothyroidism, but that blood work doesn't catch. So that thyroid ratio has been great. And I love the sodium to magnesium ratio too. And I will say that like general loss of resilience that we see with a low sodium magnesium ratio is in most of our clients at the start of their program. And it makes sense that they're in the symptoms that they're in when we've lost that buffer for stress. What is yours? I'm curious. What's your favorite?
Honestly, so sodium to potassium.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. Well, and I think, years ago, I don't even want to say when I first learned about it, it was like, they called it the life death ratio. And I'm like, that's a bit, I don't want to, I feel like that's really scary, right? We don't need to go down that road. But what I find super fascinating about it is that you come across those, and you mentioned it earlier, Kaely, where we're like the practitioners, but we're a type A and we're go, right? Sometimes we're our own worst client, right? And that ratio really deciphers that personality type when the person isn't necessarily accepting or understanding that that's an issue for them. And then when that ratio comes up and you're like, but now we're in the exhaustive stage of stress, you're pushing, but you're not listening either, right? And I find that ratio identifies stress in people when they really don't, when they don't feel like they're stressed because they've gotten so used to it. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So I find that's a really interesting one. What's one of the most fun projects you see coming up in the future? Is there something, I know there's a lot of, kind of modernizing things and I get that, right? We all have that in the kind of back end business, but what's one of the things that's on the docket and you're like, I can't wait for this?
I'm really excited about the data collection part and the possibilities for more research. And when I say data collection, even as simply as updating the symptoms and conditions that are tracked on the submittal form so we can start to look at trends for things, because I'm sure you guys all have different specialties in your practices and have seen things there. But to be able to track that on the scale of a lab that's doing this kind of volume is really exciting to me. So
that's amazing.
I'm excited about a lot, but I think that's the most.
That's probably one of my favorite things. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? More questions? What do we want to know? What do we want to share? Who wants to dive in? Come on, somebody has questions. It's impossible that you don't.
We just can't think of them right now.
Right? You're like, but I'm on the spot. I don't know what my question's going to be. Well, takeaway is making sure that you're choosing the lab that's doing it right. For me, that's what matters. Right. And I feel like, and Kaely, maybe you can expand on this. I'm sure you've thought about it. I've always thought about a standard global protocol for hair preparation, right? So that everybody's doing it the same. That would be, I just think of a way to be able to get it more into the mainstream and maybe even into the medical community. We do have some alternative MDs that are using hair testing very successfully in so many different ways, but I think that there's so much more that could be accomplished.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be exceptionally helpful to have some standardization there. And then the other major hurdle, I will say, for that kind of adoption is the amount of education it requires to really do HTMA right. And it shouldn't be a deterrent. I think it's actually a really exciting thing. And a clinician that loves to learn is like excited to wrap their hands around a test like this. But it's not as quick as looking at, some blood work at first glance. But yeah, I think if we had some standardization, we had some education, that would be huge. And then just awareness around like how rigorous the quality assurance and quality control side of things are. And I guess I can add a couple of comments on that before we wrap up here too, for anyone that might not know. I think it's easy to think of HTMA testing as like separate to the type of QA QC rigors that like a LabCorp might be subject to, but at Trace Elements we're CLIA certified, so we have to adhere to their guidelines for precision, reliability, for laboratory practices. And in addition to that, our lab here has very rigorous QA QC controls that they go through. I spent a whole day in the lab with our analytical chemists learning about this because it's on our website and it's like there's bullet points of everything that goes on, but it doesn't mean anything to a non-chemist's mind. And essentially every patient result is based on an hourly National Institute of Standards and Technology traceable curve. And the important takeaway for that is that it ensures that measurements taken with calibrated instruments are reliable and trustworthy. So when you have calibrated instruments, they have to be reported back to like an NIST like this to ensure that that calibration is correct. For every 24 samples that go through our machines, there's a very rigorous quality control validation process. And that's really what the step-by-step list on our website explains, like what goes into that. And then as those results come out, they're compared to a representative reference range that's derived from the like analysis of an international collection of healthy and normal subjects. And that's important too, because your results are only as valuable as what they're being compared to. And that's really like the bare minimum of what you need to do as a CLIA certified lab to maintain that. But beyond that, we do routine spiked sample recoveries. So that's testing the accuracy of an analytical method by adding like a known amount of an analyte, running it through and making sure that we're actually getting that result on the back end. We do daily split sample specimen analysis. So we make sure that somebody's sample tested both times is coming back the same. We participate voluntarily in interlaboratory test comparison surveys, just really like as open of a book as possible to make sure that this data gets out there. And then on top of that, we've got daily, weekly, monthly QA QC studies that just make sure that our calibrations are good, our methodology is sound, and that we've got highly precise, accurate, and verifiable detection limits. So again, not super fun topic, but really important when it comes to making decisions about what labs you want to use.
Absolutely. And important to us, right? As clinicians, that's definitely important to us so that we know that we can trust the consistency and quality that is should be there. So that's important for sure. Amazing.
I hear it so often that feedback from practitioners that start using HTMA, and I've said this before, that the thing that most people say is, why wasn't I taught this? Why didn't I learn this before? Because when they start using it and they actually learn to interpret it properly, they realize how valuable it is as part of the whole toolkit. So it's brilliant.
Yeah, we hear that time and time again, don't we? And I think, that's one of the reasons, Kaely, you shared your story. I think that's one of the reasons a lot of us kind of fell into it too. I remember way back in, over 10 years ago when somebody said, why don't you test your hair? I'm like, what are you talking about? And then it was like, it changed my life. And I'd done I don't even know how. I almost want to be embarrassed to say how many diagnostic tests I had done and all the protocols and all the things, right? So I think we're all kind of in the same boat with that discovery, thinking, geez, I wish I would have figured this out a long time ago.
Yeah, I feel that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kaely. We are excited to see the next steps that the Trace Element's going to take. We'll be right there with you, and so happy you can join us today, chat about it, answer some kind of pertinent, burning questions that we get all the time. So I think this is going to be a wonderful episode for people to dive into. So thanks, everyone. And for those of you watching, of course, make sure you subscribe to our channel, the HTMA View. Give this episode a like, and we will see you on the next show.